We'll talk with a safety professional and author who's tapped into the importance of relationships and creating a safe culture on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. And it's an honor to be able to feature exceptional safety professionals who just happen to be of Hispanic descent. But this episode is not just about safety, it's also about leadership. In November 2021, a record 4.5 million US workers quit their jobs. The vast number of people leaving the workforce said that the issue for them was their leaders. As a matter of fact, a recent report suggests that 82% of this group that was surveyed indicated they would consider quitting just because of a bad manager. There's little doubt that leadership in an organization has a tremendous impact on how safe and comfortable people feel in that very same organization. And leaders certainly have a significant role in maintaining safety as more than just a slogan. So again, our guest is not only an experienced safety professional, she's the published author. She has a very unique approach to safety leadership. Rosa Carrillo is the author of The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership. And I have a copy that we'll be referring to throughout the conversation today. And I'd just like to welcome Rosa. How are you?
Oh, great. Thanks. It's good to be with you today and talking about these things. It's my passion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to get right into it. And I find that the best way to learn about our guests is from our guests. So who is Rosa?
A thought-provoking question, David. I've been asking myself that all my life, partly because of my heritage. I was born in the US, but I was raised in Mexico. And when I was in Mexico, I couldn't let them know that I was born in the US because at that time, everybody really hated. I mean, they don't really like the US now, but they really hated it back then. And then when I moved to this country, people made fun of me because I didn't speak English and my accent. And so I didn't, who am I? Where do I belong? I don't belong in Mexico. I don't belong in the US. And I didn't realize that I was actually going through a very traumatic experience. I mean, you just get kind of immune to it, right? But it's been I would say it's the foundation of the work that I eventually did in my life, because my first career, I was a teacher in a bilingual classroom. So I taught students in English and Spanish. And most of my students were Hispanics, and the lucky English speakers that got to be with us learned Spanish. So that was fun. And then I went into, a business setting, corporate training and development. So I learned about culture and organizational development, where I also became interested in environmental safety and health. Because as it turned out, the company I was working with, we were primarily in the motivational market. And at that time in the 80s, we had prizes for everything. If you didn't report an injury, at one point, one of our clients gave away a truck. And one of the employees took me aside and said, "Rosa, this isn't working." I said, "Why?" "Well, the guy that just won that truck doesn't report his injuries. And so what's the point?" And I said to myself, oh, you know what? And you're right. And I've always learned everything I know from the people that I work with, who just open my eyes uh, to the reality, of what's going on and how they feel and how things are impacting them. So that's been my work, really focusing on, one is people from not just minorities, but any person from a disadvantaged background that didn't have an opportunity maybe to go to the right school or school, and so they aren't getting the opportunities that they should get. But I have to say that it has primarily been Latinos that I've worked with. And now, happily, during Black Lives Matter, I started working with Black women, and I'm absolutely in love with what Black women have done and accomplished. They're just such role models of strength and resilience and fortitude. It's a whole new level. So I'm happy to talk about any of that, and it does really impact safety, because if people aren't getting the level of respect they need, if they're being excluded, their minds are elsewhere. They're certainly not buying into the corporate slogan of safety first. And as you know, Black and brown people have the highest rates of injuries.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that is a fact that I'm fine. Sometimes when I bring that up, and you've probably had this happen as well. People kind of go, "Well, I'm surprised by that," and I'm not sure why you'd be surprised, particularly in a country that started off the way this one did, with some of the horrific things that happened to all kinds of people. Why is it that you would think it would get better because you pass a law in 1970, and a law that hasn't, for the most part, changed, and there's nothing in the OSH Act. Matter of fact, and I repeat this a lot, it's 19,600 plus words. It mentions psychological twice. It wasn't designed to be concerned about how people feel. It just wasn't. So now that we're having this conversation about psychosocial hazards, about psychological safety, about psychological health and safety, concepts that are all related but slightly different, folks are starting to realize that maybe we've missed something. And maybe we've missed some people as well, because the systems that are established were established by a group for that group because that's what they understood. That's it. Not all of it was intentional, but if a group
I don't think so. The unconscious bias is so much bigger than our conscious biases.
Yes.
Which are considerable, by the
way. Absolutely. Absolutely. So specifically,
yeah.
When you hear the term or the phrase psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you? How do you interpret that concept?
Mm-hmm. Well, I interpret it through the eyes of inclusion and belonging, because having experienced it myself and knowing what a burden it is, and how much stress goes into trying to fit in, trying to be understood, trying to be accepted, and then getting ignored after all of your efforts. When I think of psychological safety and health, it's mental health, it's your whole potential, which is being repressed when you're not included and you're not respected. And so that's my big thing, is I'm thinking, wow, if somebody like me had so much trouble, because I consider myself a relatively intelligent, hardworking person, if somebody like me had so much trouble getting management to listen or hear or to get a space at the table, I can't imagine what somebody goes through that does not have education,
sure,
and never had exposure, which to the political aspects of life, which I never did. I had to learn everything the hard way. But some of us, like Michelle Obama in her book, I thought, wow, that woman, she she knew what she was about and what she was doing early on. And look how far a person can go with that kind of support, as opposed to what most people have to endure, which is no support at all and having to prove yourself over and over again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the title of your book is The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership. So where does that concept come from for you? How did that come into your head?
Oh gosh, I guess it just struck a chord with me when I first well, I mean, even before I read anything about it, I was looking into the fact that the different cultures have such different attitudes towards collectivism and individualism. So I'm from um, the Mexican descent, and we're very collective, very family oriented. So, and I'm a woman, so it's all about taking care of people and making sure that everybody else is all right before you are, and all of those things. And I started understanding why I had a lot of conflict with my white colleagues who were very, and I realized they were individualistic. They don't think the same way that I do. And if I ever tried to bring up repression or discrimination, or we didn't have the word lack of psychological safety back then, we had lack of respect, that or that they just wouldn't value the different perspective that I would bring in. And it was because of the way they were raised. They have no context for it. So it kind of helps you not to take things personally.
Right.
Although the truth is that after a while, it feels personal.
It does.
And I think that I was held back by that for a long time. So when I work with people, I do executive coaching. I really work with, we have to let it go, not because we forgive anybody or because, those things weren't difficult and sometimes horrific, but for our own soul and our own ability to move forward and unleash our own potential. I mean, David, that book took me 25 years to publish.
Wow.
Yeah, I was rejected so many times with my ideas. Because the first article I wrote about this relationship piece and trust and communication was 1995.
Wow.
And I got no traction.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It would appear that you've been ahead of your time for a while. Honestly, I believe that. I believe that there are people who, one reason why it's so difficult for them is the concept that they're talking about is that the masses aren't ready for it yet. And it takes a while for people to come around, because this is all the rage now. I mean, you've been talking about it, thinking about it for, more than 25 years. And now people are starting to go like, hey, maybe that's an important thing. I often suggest that, what the pandemic did was not really change a lot of anything. It just exposed a lot of everything, because these issues have been around for decades. The need to have stronger relationships, not just in the workplace, but just in general, just in our communities, have been around for decades. And they've been the source of a lot of pain and a lot of trauma for people. And you've really, really, really struck a chord. I have to tell you. And and again, as I said before we came on, I certainly don't want to give away everything in the book, because it gives folks got to go out and get themselves a copy. But I did want to talk a little bit about this concept, and so some of the and again, I've got my book marked. So and I wanted to talk a little bit about the 8 beliefs and principles that kind of surround relationship-centered leadership, and just kind of. So I want to bring up one and have you tell me what were you thinking, and just kind of the high points. Like I said, people have to get the book to read it for themselves. But the first one is true communication takes place in the presence of relationship and trust.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Well, as you know, because of my repeated attempts to communicate um, and not being heard, I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And what I finally came to was that people, that part of what listening to understand necessitates trust and respect, because I could write you off just based on your appearance. You know,
Mm-hmm.
right? I could write you off because of your accent,
Mm-hmm.
um, and or because we're not in the same profession. So therefore, what does it matter what you say? And what have employees been trying to tell us for decades and decades? Yeah, now you're worried about it because somebody got killed, but haven't we been talking to you about that problem for years, months, and nobody's listening? So that's where that came from, that much of the stuff that managers think is communication, it isn't. I mean, emails, forget it. Certainly updates on bulletin boards. By the way, everybody's schedule changed. Did you see it on the bulletin board a week ago? Oh no, I don't have anybody to take care of my kids now. Well, too bad. I posted it.
Right.
I posted it. So you see, because there's no caring there. If you were a person to me, I would say, hey, heads up, we're changing the work schedule. But so I'm helping a client now, and they're doing a big safety improvement effort. And so they're putting together their communication plan, and same old. We're going to have these community forums, and the executives are going to go on a tour and tell everybody, about the changes, and everybody's going to get really excited because the executives showed up. And I'm like, no, not really. They're just going to say, oh, another, what do they call that? Not the color of the day, the flavor of the day. That was the favorite expression.
Right.
So no, and then I had to bring it up many times before finally somebody in my client group said, oh, we have to have conversations with people. And that's what my whole book is about. That if you're not having a conversation, you're not communicating. Right. So what does that mean about most of our, quote, communication efforts in safety?
Another topic that comes up particularly around safety a lot is the concept of accountability. And the second belief and principle is inclusion precedes accountability. Tell me more.
Okay, there's again, hey, you want me to be a good citizen, but why? Why would I be a good citizen if I don't get anything back in return? And during the demonstrations and protests, oh, isn't that awful that people are looting and doing this and doing that? Or the riots that we have periodically in the all Black neighborhoods, Well, I understand it perfectly. It's like, what have you done for me lately? So that's the extreme, but we live it every day in our organizations, even in our families, which is, if you want me to have your back, if you want me to collaborate, work with you, then you have to treat me with respect all the time, not just when you meet me, but all the time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was almost going to say something about sex, but I was
Well, okay. The third principle is innovation, resilience, inclusion, and accountability are interdependent.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other. They're all together. So you start with the inclusion piece, and that as we know, we're learning more and more about how the brain operates. We know that more learning can take place, more listening, more communication can take place. And then the ideas and the creativity starts to flow. So
Mm.
innovation, and you're able to think about how to adapt to situations, because some things you can't change.
Right.
You have to just simply adapt to them, right?
Sure.
So it's really all one piece.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. So all these folks who thought, hey, we can just come up with new ideas, but we don't have to include anybody, and they're going to like it, right?
Oh yeah, by the way, we're having a meeting and I want you to bring all your great ideas. I know I never listened to you, but please contribute. Be
Yes.
innovative.
Yeah, I call those pseudo participative meetings.
There you go.
Yeah, they look participative. There are people in the room, but we all know what's going to happen before we went in there anyway, because the decision's really already made. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Why isn't anybody talking? Why is only one person talking? Because that's the person that gets listened to.
Oh my goodness. The fourth principle is people are able and willing to contribute to the success of the enterprise.
That's the bedrock of it all. Our attitudes about human nature, particularly when you're in a position of power. I can't say this enough, but the way we show up impacts all the people around us. So if we show up and we're communicating that we care, I think you're smart, I think you're bright. I learned that as a kindergarten teacher. We were taught the psychology behind that if you assume your students are geniuses, they perform at much higher levels than if you assume they're dumb. And a lot of teachers would do that if they had, all poor students or all Black or brown students. They would go in with an attitude of, oh, their parents don't give any support. They're, all the things that you tell yourself of why these children are going to fail. And of course, they were right. They failed. But I was always a big proponent, and I'll pat myself on the back because my students learned to read when they were 5 in kindergarten, and that was way before anybody was expected to do anything in kindergarten. Now you're supposed to learn to read at 3, so the bar keeps getting higher.
Wow.
Turns out that human beings are amazing. They're just amazing, and we don't treat them with enough respect.
Sure. Another principle is drift is a positive quality of adaptive human behavior. I don't think I've heard that one before.
Well, I wrote that when it wasn't all that popular to talk about it. But of course, I was influenced by Sidney Dekker, who wrote Drift into Failure, and almost impossible to read books. So I recommend that you read my book instead. But
Okay.
But how did I get started on that? Oh, because I had written an article on why don't people follow procedures? Even the ones where if you stick your hand into that moving machinery, you are going to probably lose that hand. So it doesn't make sense. Why do people stick their hands into moving machinery? And so I began to study the discipline of complexity. And that's where it all comes from, because in complexity, everything is constantly shifting and changing, and human beings are constantly adapting. We were created, our DNA is created that way. And that's why it's nearly impossible for us to do the same thing in the same way. For a lot of us, it's just not possible. It's not in our DNA. And so when we were criticizing employees for changing the procedure. They were like, I was improving it.
Right.
And so that's why they didn't listen to us, because we were taking the different approach. The wrong approach. If we take the approach of, oh, okay, you changed it for that. Let's, show me and tell me how that's going to make it better. And then we might find out that it's not going to make things better and they are going to lose their hand. We've had a dialogue, but you see, it goes back to why don't they listen to me? It's because I have no relationship with them. If I just go and tell them that you're so stupid, don't stick your hand in there. Why are you doing that? I have told you a million times, blah, blah, blah. And we do the same thing with our kids. So all of these lessons are also good for our family relationships as well, because we often don't listen as well as we should to our children.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The seventh principle and belief is our prejudgments and biases can prevent us from finding the truth in what we see and hear.
Yeah. Yeah. The truth is raining down upon us. All the data we need to prevent the next fatality is raining down upon us. But we can't see it and we can't hear it because we don't have the context. Okay. And that's why employees are such an important part of deciphering the environment and what's going on, because they have they're out there doing the work all of the time. And I'm not saying employees don't have their blind spots.
Sure.
They do, because that's why people end up, in a jam a lot of times. But working together, if I found out okay, let's take hazard identification. If I go out there and we have a discussion and you identify certain hazards, and then I say, well, what about these over here? And then you say, oh, you have a good point. Thank you. But if we don't have that dialogue, and I send you a memo, make sure you look for this or that, or here's a checklist. Checklists do not work, right? You have to have the conversation. And I don't know if what's his name? I think it's Maxwell's his last name, the energy wheel. Are you familiar with the energy wheel?
I'm not.
Well, he did research with 10,000 different employees in construction. And he discovered that when they were doing their pre-job checks, they overlooked 45% of the hazards, and most of them were in the energy sector. So he developed a wheel where the group could systematically go through each, but it's a dialogue, okay, are we looking at weather? Are we looking at, electrical wires? Are there any pipes buried here? So you go around, and I think we need one like that for psychological safety.
Wow.
And I wonder what that would look like. Would you like to help me develop that?
I'm interested.
Okay, let's do it.
Would
really help.
This entire conversation about psychological health and safety, particularly in the U.S., is really new. I mean, the other countries around the world that are really into this are probably 12 to 15 years ahead of us. They really are. And we're going to have to start someplace. And I think part of that's really behind this podcast is to have dialogue and conversation with people who get it. And as we build the community of people who get it, we can provide tools for folks who might not get it or who just need help. The eighth belief and principle of relationship-centered leadership.
Before we get off that topic, I did want to bring something up, because I noticed in the ISO on psychological safety,
45,003.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to really focus on physical things. I don't think I saw anything in there about discrimination or microaggressive behavior. Did you?
Well, the way they describe it, at least when I review the 88 hazards on the list, what they describe are the effects of racism, discrimination, harassment. Harassment is mentioned, but so my definition of a psychosocial hazard is slightly different than in the standard. They identify psychosocial risk, but not necessarily what a hazard is. And if you look when I was doing my research,
Mhm.
there are tons and tons and tons of definitions all over the world. But the one that so when I collapsed them all, a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that is perceived or experienced by the person as a threat to them, and that threat in turn affects their behavior. So it's all kinds of things, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And again, the ones that we know the most about, particularly in this country, are really bullying is the one that there's a body of research around it, which is not illegal, which it should be, but it's not. And then the illegal forms of treatment of people, harassment, discrimination, based on, protected class or protected class activity. So we have this, it's this problem, and we're looking at it like that, to be quite honest. That's the issue, is this, and the international standard is not a prescriptive, it's more descriptive. And it's really very, very broad. I think it has some benefit. The reality is the standard in Canada actually has a lot more detail. The one in Australia has a little bit more detail. The one in the UK has a little bit more detail. But, when you put out a global thing, they can't put it all in there. So that's why I believe we need one here in the United States. We do, that addresses the kinds of psychosocial hazards that you're going to experience here. And again, our long history, sad history of how we've treated all kinds of people, I think we have a slightly different story to tell. Yeah, I really do. So if I cover this last one, relationships influence emotions, feelings, and beliefs, which influence decisions. That principle is directly connected to the description I gave of a psychosocial hazard, because the relationship we have with each other, you could say something to me, and if we're in a relationship, I understand what you said. I understand your intent and your context, and it's really not. It doesn't bother me, because that's the way we roll, so to speak. But if you don't have a relationship with people, I don't know that. I don't know that that's how you talk all the time, because we don't talk. I don't know those things. And I go back to my own experience and how that lands with me and how that makes me feel. And then when I tell you, well, I don't feel good, and then well, how come you don't feel good? That further devalues, my perspective. And that's not good. It's not good at all. It's not good at all.
It's like when you mention to someone, well, that made me feel a little bit excluded or marginalized, and they go, what? That's ridiculous, suck it up. And then
but
that cuts the conversation.
It does.
Yeah, and that last belief too, I really wanted to emphasize the role of emotions in the workplace, because as I say somewhere in my book, we're expected to leave our emotions at the door when we come into work, which is absolutely ridiculous. And that's how managers are trained. So they don't know what to do with all that stuff that crops up as just a normal part of being human and working with people. It takes a long time to learn how to do that on your own. Because I know when I became a supervisor the first time, that was a very difficult aspect of my job, dealing with people's emotions, angers, unfairness, and all of these things. And I'm like, that's not very professional. That's not very professional of you.
But it is very human.
But it is very human. And so, it's we have to start talking about these things way early in life. And I think some schools have started doing that, even with like elementary and middle school, talking about emotional intelligence. They talk about bullying and how to handle that. They talk about, if you disagree with your parents about something, how to approach it so that you can start voicing yourself and who you are. And I mentor in a program like that. It's called Empower Her. And we have a terrific college graduation rate because they're learning how to navigate life.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. 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 I just I wanted to mention also, I talked about at the beginning of at the top of the podcast about how this is not just about safety, but it's about leadership. So there's the concept of building the relationship and how important that is, but then there's also the leadership piece. And you talk about in the book the how you describe it as the 5 leadership orientations. I thought, like, why have I not heard of this before? Because I didn't have a book. So the 5 leadership orientations, because there are lots and lots of theories out there about leadership, and I think they're all valid. I really do. I think there are as many ways to lead as there are people on the earth. The challenge is, does that way that you lead work with the people you say you want to lead? Does it work with them? That's what matters. So you talk about unification. What's the role of unification? How does that affect leadership?
Well, that's inclusion. Because we live in a we-they society. It's you and me. So especially in the US, I think it's definitely not that way in other cultures, but in the US, we're very isolated and we're taught to aspire to that, right? To be independent and stand on our own 2 feet. But we are not, our DNA isn't supporting us in that. Our DNA supports us in collaboration for survival.
Mm.
So that's the first step and it goes back to my rule number 1, inclusion before accountability.
Mm.
And
Right.
there's so many things you have to unify on, common vocabulary, the meaning of the words that you're talking about, the direction that you're going in. If you're not unified in that, then it's very hard to create sustainable change.
Sure. Penetration.
Yeah, I struggled with that word. I thought they're going to misinterpret that word, but
Right.
it's penetration. Like we're too much surface conversation, not enough. Let's really get into what this means for you. Taking the time to have a conversation with someone and really getting to know them, letting somebody get to know you to penetrate your facade. Yeah, so I guess it's a lot to do also with wanting to get not so much to the root cause, because I don't believe in root causes that much, but every time you ask why, it takes you a little bit deeper into understanding and having a common understanding of what it is you're trying to correct or fix.
Right. And the for me, the kind of sad thing about that lack of trying to penetrate and get to the heart of the matter is it comes up eventually anyway. We don't talk about it, but we act about it. We act in a certain way that says, so you can say, I care about you, you're included, we're interested in your safety, but the actions are really what you really believe. It's not just the words, it's really what you really believe in. And it's important to really get down to the heart of the matter about how people are feeling about this new thing we're getting ready to do. How do you really feel about that? Because they'll nod yes, but their body's saying no.
I really don't. And their minds are closed. They're going.
That's right. That's
Overload.
Absolutely. So, resolution? You mean we have to resolve things?
Well, it's double-edged because you have to be resolute to tackle a difficult challenge. So for example, this whole thing of diversity and inclusion, it's no piece of cake. And I think those orientations are really important if we're going to work through all of those challenges. But you have to be resolute in your belief about that humans basically are able to and want to contribute to society. You have to be resolute in that, because people are going to sometimes prove you wrong. They're going to betray you. They're going to go back on their commitments, and you can't let a leader cannot let those events derail them. And I've seen it too often. Well, the union decided to pull out. They're using safety as a political football, so I'm not going to do anything. Well, that's not what a leader does. A leader resolutely pursues with the end goal, and resolutely does what he or she has to do to bring people along and include them.
Sure.
Resolute.
Wow. Enactment.
Yeah, I like that word. I learned it from Carl Week. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote Managing the Unexpected, and he did a lot of work with high reliable organizations, and he was always using the word enactment. And I just like it because, we could say taking action is the last step in change, because we can talk all we want about change, but if you don't take some kind of action, you're not going to be able to change anything, because from the action, even if it's wrong, you learn.
Sure.
And you can correct.
Sure.
But enactment then means that you bring things into being through action. That's how you bring things into being. And so if we want true diversity and inclusion, we have to act in ways all the time that will lead to that. And that's not to say that we're going to be perfect, because I know I'm not. I'll lose my patience or be short with somebody. And then that's when apologies come in handy.
Right.
But you can keep moving forward.
Right. And again, the stronger the relationship, the wife and I have been together 35 years.
Congratulations.
There are some things about one another we've just accepted that that's the way that is, and we're okay with it.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, there's some things about me she doesn't like, and some things about her that I don't like. But it's not enough to break the relationship, because there's all the other stuff. That's a part of who we all are. Yeah. There's something. It's okay. We don't have to like everything about the person that we work with.
And that's where the belonging and security comes from.
Yes.
Because, hey, when somebody loves you just the way you are, that's the price beyond.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Wow. Oh boy, perseverance.
Yeah, without perseverance, you are not ever going to reach a vision, a challenging vision, or resolve a complex people problem. Some people call them wicked problems, right? I like that too. That's a wicked problem. You're not going to be able to solve that in a decade,
Right.
Because it took how many hundreds of years to make it.
Right.
So perseverance is, and a lot of people write about that in leadership, that leaders always talk about the fact that if you can't get up after you fall, then you can't lead.
Wow. Absolutely. Again, there are other things we could talk. I really, when I was reading the book, I says, I have to talk to her about at least those concepts.
Mm-hmm.
But, I understand you're working on some new projects as well. Got some new thoughts that might be coming up here fairly soon. Can you, lift up the curtain or pull back the curtain a little bit and share a little bit about what's next?
Yeah, I'm very excited because, the working title is Inclusive Leadership, which no one has used up till now. And, trying to distinguish, again, there's thousands of books on leadership, but I think that inclusive leadership is good for the times that we're in right now. And so the book is really about how the confluence of COVID-19, the Black Lives Matters movement, and the Great Resignation created a platform, a burning platform for leaders to reevaluate and change their the way that they approach people, and especially the resignation piece. Oh, all of a sudden, now you're so valuable to me. But before, I didn't even bother to say good morning. So, so it is a very, and then I compare it to like the Black Death changed everything. It changed the whole entire economic system because it killed so many of the workers that suddenly the lords had to start paying their the people that tended the land. What a novel idea. So, before that happened, they didn't get paid for their work.
Wow.
The privilege of living on a piece of land was about all they got. So, this is a very propitious moment for people like you and me to teach and to talk about the changes that are possible to any leader who's willing to listen and engage.
Right. Yeah, as we talked about in the opener, the vast majority of people who are leaving, they say about 40% of employees think about quitting. Yeah. And of the 40% who think about it, 82%, they're leaving is really about their manager.
Yeah.
That it's not the pay, it's not the benefits, it's not any of that. Those are a factor. I read some research here recently that suggested that toxic culture is 10.4 times more important than compensation in terms of a person making a decision to leave. So it's really about, and that is about the relationship with the person that you work with or the person that supervises you, the person who has kind of control over your day, so to speak.
So there's the relationship factor.
Absolutely. So share a little bit more. And again, you talk about the relationship factor in safety leadership. How, can you share a little bit more about how this relationship is important for safety professionals?
Yes, I talk with them about that all the time because you don't need a title to be a leader, and being a manager doesn't make you a leader. Leadership is a choice. And many of the safety professionals that I've worked with see themselves as leaders, and they want to be better leaders. They realize that they're in a position to influence and make the workplace better. I am very impressed with who's attracted to work in safety and health. I just worked with a global group last week, and those people were amazing. And part of our closing session was, what is your passion in life? And it was completely open. It wasn't like, what's your passion about safety or anything, but everything for them was about making the workplace safer and the kinds of changes they hope to see. So that's part of my new book as well, is that I'm nominating safety and health professionals for a much bigger role in our organizations in the coming decade. I think we have totally missed the boat there. A lot of them feel disregarded, unappreciated, unheard. So I would like to be able to change that in some small way.
Sure. So in our final few moments here, share a little bit about how you said you're working with a global company, a global organization, and have worked with others. So if people are listening and they want to get a hold of you, they want to find out how do we find you? I mean, how do we get a hold of you other than going out and buying the book?
Buy the book.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I have a website, which is CarrilloConsultants.com. Very simple. My last name, Carrillo, consultants with an S.com. And I'm on LinkedIn a lot. A lot. So if you Google my name, Rosa Antonia Carrillo, I will come up all over the place.
Right.
Lots and lots of articles that I've written, and I've been interviewed. I'm writing my book was a really good thing for me. My profile. I think before the book, I was mentioned 500 times on the internet. And when I did I Googled myself, and this time I came up with 50,000 hits. So write a book if you want to be popular on Google.
Wow. 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 That's a lot. That's a
lot. Yeah. So I'm hoping it's going to translate into the kind of work I want to do, which is to work with the safety and health teams to help build up their psychological safety. I think that's the first step. And then, be able to teach the tools to build those relationships that so they can build allies in the organizations. And I call that the Trojan horse approach to organizational change.
Right. Wow. Again, this is we could talk about more, but I do try to keep these to an hour or so. So I just really enjoyed, learning a little bit more about, the concept really to me just makes sense. It really does. I mean, how can you be safe in an environment where you don't have relationships with people? I mean, I'm not sure how that's even possible. And I think that might be underlying some of the challenges that folks have, is they just don't feel, they don't bond with each other. People go into their silos and do their thing, but they just don't reach out to other people. And as I'm a believer, I believe in individualism as well. But the most selfish thing I can probably do is probably going to be for somebody else. Because if I can create an environment where you're doing a safe thing, we work together, and I help you be safe, then you're able to help me on that day that, something, you can see that hazard that I don't see. So I can't do it all myself. I think I'm a pretty intelligent person as well, but I just can't do it all. And I need other people. No. And I need other people who see the world similar. They don't have to be identical, but similar to me. And they're interested in relationships and safety. And it just makes it easier for me. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So just real quickly, what are you doing in your life right now? Are you consulting or working?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so as I share with, folks on the podcast, this is a part of a global podcast community. There's the Heart was over in Australia. There's now one in Singapore, in the UK, in Canada, and now here in the US. And my consulting practice, ID2 Solutions, ID2 Solutions. That's a whole conversation about why the dash is there. But anyway, similar. I have a similar approach. Most of my working life I spent in fire rescue organizations in the public sector, but I realized that I've really been a safety guy most of my adult life, because I was really more interested in, the safety aspect of the job than running into buildings on fire. But I also, over the course of time, I started to realize that the vast majority of the incidents that got people seriously injured or killed, there was something mental, psychological, emotional that came up that nobody paid attention to. We didn't pay attention to it. And it went on long enough to have a physical outcome, and that's when we paid attention to it. And so, yeah, that's one of the ways I try to help folks to see that, again, I have more disaster stories than most people I know. I can tell you all the blood and gore and all, but let's go all the way back to why that happened. And often there's an emotional thing, a psychological thing, a social thing that we could have addressed before it got really heinous. So that's really what I'm interested in, is helping people. And again, just helping people figure out how to get safe. That ultimately safety is about getting and feeling safe. And as I so often say, safe is an adjective. It's not a verb. It's not a noun. It's an adjective. And it's about people's perspective and how they feel, and it can be different. We all have different views about those topics. but there's a lot of ways that they intersect. And again,
sounds like we have a lot in common.
We do. And I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and again for your book. We'll be looking forward to your next publication. Again, I plan to be on the early list when that comes out, so make sure you let me know. And I also want to have some conversation down the road. Again, we've been doing this podcast for a short time, and I see myself doing some reunions down the road about, okay, so how are things going? How have things changed? Yeah. So I look forward to
some thought to that psychological safety wheel.
Absolutely. We should have some conversation about that, because lots of tools that we're all going to need, again, to grow the community of folks who are interested in this topic. So again, thanks a lot for this episode, for sitting in with me and having the conversation, for your great work in the book, and for what you're going to do next. I certainly appreciate it. And to those of you who have been either watching or listening, please do follow us on, again, I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can follow the podcast on LinkedIn, or you can follow us also on the website, psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can find all the latest episodes. And we'll look forward to presenting yet another guest and yet another topic soon on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.